It is 3 in the morning. You are not asleep. You have not been asleep for the last 2 hours. You are lying in the dark with your eyes open, and your mind is doing the thing it does, cycling through the same loop it has run 100 times before. The email you should not have sent, the conversation that went wrong, the thing that might happen next week, or next month, or maybe never, but what if it does? The fear that you are behind, that you are failing, that something is coming, and you will not be ready for it. You are not broken. You are not faithless. You are doing something that every human being on the planet does, something that the smartest people you know do, something that monks do, something that pastors do in the dark after everyone has left the building. You are overthinking, and here is what makes it worse. You know the verse. You have known it since Sunday school or a devotional someone texted you or a coffee mug on your kitchen shelf. Take every thought captive. You have tried. You have breathed slowly. You have journaled. You have prayed and then immediately started worrying again inside the prayer. And somehow the spiral comes back. Tonight it is back. So what is going wrong? Here is what I want to show you today. The problem is not your willpower. The problem is not your faith. The problem is that almost everything you have been taught about this verse is missing the most important word in it. There is a word Paul uses in 2 Corinthians 10:5 that most modern translations soften, and when you hear the real meaning of that word, you will understand why the gentle approach to anxious thoughts has never been enough. We will get to that word, but not yet. First, you need to understand where Paul was when he wrote this, because the location changes everything. Paul did not write 2 Corinthians from a quiet room with a candle and a cup of wine. He wrote it from inside a conflict. The church at Corinth had turned on him. There were men, teachers, influencers, people with credentials and confidence who had walked into his church and told his people that Paul was not worth listening to, that he was weak in person, that his letters were intimidating but his face-to-face presence was unimpressive. Paul calls them in chapter 11, without apology, super apostles, and he does not mean it as a compliment. He is defending his ministry. He is under attack, and it is in that moment, not in peace, not in a prayer retreat, that he sits down and writes what may be the most precise psychological warfare manual in all of human history. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Read it again, slowly. Count the military words: wage war, weapons, divine power. Demolish strongholds, demolish. Again, take captive. This is not a poem about positive thinking. This is a battle plan, and Paul wrote it while under fire. Now, in the original Greek, Paul writes that we demolish logismos. Your Bible probably says arguments. Some translations say reasoning. The New Living Translation says human reasoning. The Message says warped philosophies. All of those are correct, and all of them are too soft. The Greek word is logismos. Logismos. And it does not mean a random thought that floats through your head at 3 in the morning. It does not mean a passing worry or a fleeting fear. A logismos is a structured argument, a system of reasoning, a fortress your mind builds, brick by brick, assumption by assumption, until it feels more real than the Word of God sitting on your nightstand. When you are anxious, you are not having random thoughts. You are living inside a logismos, a logical structure your mind has constructed that says, here is the evidence. Here is what the evidence means. Here is what will happen next. Here is why you should be afraid. It has its own architecture, its own internal consistency. It is, in the most literal sense, a stronghold, a place your mind retreats to and defends. And this is where it gets remarkable. Josephus, the Jewish historian, who lived in the first century and watched Roman legions tear through Judea, uses this same word, logismos, in his account of the Jewish war. He describes how Roman commanders, before breaching a fortified city, would first demolish the logismoi of the defenders, the mental fortifications, the arguments the people inside were making to themselves about why they could hold out, why the walls would not fall, why rescue was coming. Rome did not just knock down physical walls. Rome dismantled the reasoning structures that kept people inside those walls. Paul's audience in Corinth had seen Roman legions march through their streets. When Paul said logismos, they did not picture a fleeting thought. They pictured a fortified position, a defensive structure, something that had to be actively, strategically demolished, not gently redirected. Here is what most people miss. Your anxiety is not the problem. Your anxiety is the symptom. The logismos is the problem, the argument your brain has built. That the worst outcome is the most likely one, that God's promises do not apply to your specific situation, that you are uniquely unqualified, uniquely exposed, uniquely at risk. That structure is what Paul is talking about, and you cannot dissolve it with a deep breath. You cannot journal your way out of a Roman fortress. You need demolition equipment. Paul says the weapons we fight with have divine power. The Greek is dynatos to theo, which means literally powerful to God or mighty in God's sight. This is not motivational language. This is a statement about category. The weapons available to you are not in the same category as the weapons the world uses for anxiety. The world offers management. God offers demolition. But before we talk about the weapons, you need to understand exactly what you are demolishing. Because Paul does not just say logismoi, he gives you two more targets. And if you miss either one of them, the method does not work. Paul gives you 3 targets in this one verse. Most people only work on the third one. The first target is logismos, the arguments, the structured reasoning systems, the what-if spirals, the mental case your brain builds against your own peace. We have already spent time there. The second target is panhypsoma, every high thing, every pretension, every fortification that raises itself up. The Greek word hupsoma, means elevation, a raised position. In military architecture, it described a tower, a battlement, something built deliberately high, so that it could look down on everything around it. Paul says there are things in your mind that have built themselves towers, and from those towers they fire down at your knowledge of God. You know what a hypsoma feels like. It is the voice that says your situation is the exception to every promise you have ever read. It is the thought that positions itself above Scripture and looks down at it and says, that may be true in general, but you specifically are too far gone, too late, too damaged, too ordinary for it to apply to you. It is pride dressed as realism. It is despair dressed as discernment. And it has built itself high enough that it can see your whole life from up there. Or at least it wants you to think it can. Paul says demolish it, not argue with it, not negotiate with it, not ask it politely to come down, demolish the tower. Now watch what happens next. There is a woman in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, who has been bleeding for 12 years. Her name is not recorded. We know almost nothing about her, only that she has spent everything she had on doctors who could not help her, that her condition made her ceremonially unclean under Jewish law, which means she could not enter the temple, could not be touched, could not sit at a table with her family without making them unclean too. 12 years of that. When she hears that Jesus is passing through her town, something happens in her mind before she ever moves her feet. Mark records it. She said to herself. The Greek here is very specific. She said it repeatedly. The imperfect tense meaning, she kept saying it over and over as she pushed through the crowd. If I just touch his garment, I will be made well. That is a logismos, a structured argument. But this time, it is a logismos built on the knowledge of God rather than against it. She did not build a tower that looked down on the promise. She built her reasoning on top of the promise and climbed it toward Jesus. She touched the hem of his garment, and the bleeding stopped. Immediately, the Greek word is euthes. Right then, in that instant, 12 years ended. Jesus stopped. He asked who touched him. His disciples thought the question was absurd. There were hundreds of people pressing against him. But Jesus felt power go out from him. And the woman came forward, trembling, and fell at his feet. And Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well, not your desperation, not your 12 years of suffering. Your faith, the logismos you built in the direction of God." Here is the part nobody tells you. The crowd she pushed it through to reach Jesus was not neutral. She was unclean. Every person she brushed against in that crowd she made unclean by Jewish law. She knew that. She pushed through anyway. The hypsoma, the tower that said you are too unclean, too far outside, too disqualified to approach a rabbi. She did not wait for it to come down on its own. She walked through it. Demolition does not always feel tidy. Sometimes it feels like pushing through a crowd while bleeding, saying a sentence to yourself over and over, reaching for something you cannot fully see yet. But there is a third target, and this one is the one that will explain why Peter sank. Stay with me. Matthew 14. The disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee in the middle of the night. A storm has come up, and they see a figure walking toward them on the water. They think it is a ghost. Jesus calls out, "It is me, do not be afraid." And Peter, being Peter, says, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus says one word, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat, and he walks on water. He actually walks on water. For a moment, Peter is doing something no human being had ever done. His feet are on the surface of the Sea of Galilee, and he is not sinking. And the wind is loud, and the waves are real, and he is walking. And then Matthew says something precise. He says Peter saw the wind. You cannot see wind. Peter saw the waves the wind was making. He saw the evidence, and in the space of 1 or 2 seconds, his mind built a logismos. Wind plus waves plus open water plus distance from the boat equals drowning. It was not an unreasonable argument. It was actually a very sensible argument. If you had been standing on that water and looked at those waves, you would have built the same structure, but the structure was wrong. Because the structure did not include the variable standing 3 feet in front of him. Peter began to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately euthes, the same word used for the woman's healing, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. And he said to Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" The Greek word for doubt there is distazo. It means to stand in 2 places, to be divided, to have built an argument on 2 foundations at once. Peter was not a coward. Peter got out of the boat. But once he built the logismos, once the argument was constructed and the tower was standing, it pulled him down faster than the water did. That is third target called names. Every thought, pan-noema, every individual thought that forms the building blocks of the larger structure. Before the logismos is fully built, before the hypsoma is fully standing, at the individual thought level, before the spiral has architecture, before the tower has height, Paul says you take those captive. And that word, captive, is the word we need to sit inside for a moment. The Greek word Paul uses for take captive is aikmalotizo. It is a compound word. Aikma means the point of a spear. Halotos means captured. Literally, captured at spear point. This is the word Roman soldiers used when they marched defeated enemies behind the general's chariot in a triumphal procession, hands bound, moving in one direction, not negotiating, not wandering, taken. Paul does not say redirect every thought. He does not say reframe every thought. He does not say sit with every thought and explore where it came from. He says take it captive. At spear point, march it behind Christ, the way Rome marched prisoners behind a conquering general. This changes everything about how you respond to an anxious thought. Most of us, when an anxious thought arrives, do one of three things. We fight it directly, which gives it energy and makes it louder. We run from it, which tells our nervous system it is a genuine threat worth fleeing. Or we try to reason with it, which is the most dangerous option of all, because you cannot out-argue a logismos using the same mind that built it. You cannot demolish a Roman fortress with the tools that are stored inside the fortress. Paul is not telling you to fight your thoughts. He is not telling you to suppress your thoughts. He is telling you to capture them, to take them somewhere specific, to march them at spear point to the only place where they lose their power, to Christ. This is not a metaphor. This is a method, and it has three movements. The first movement is identification. You name the thought, not the feeling, the thought behind the feeling. Anxiety is almost always downstream of a specific argument your mind is making. Find the argument. Say it out loud if you have to. I am afraid that I am going to lose this job and not be able to provide for my family, and that will mean I have failed as a person. That is a logismos. That is a structured argument with premises and a conclusion. Name it. You cannot capture what you have not identified. The second movement is interrogation. You ask the argument one question. Does this argument include God? Not, is this argument logical? Not, is this argument possible? Not, could this argument come true? One question only. Does this reasoning structure account for the God who fed Elijah in the wilderness, who parted the Red Sea for people who had nowhere to go, who raised his own son from a sealed tomb on the third day? If the answer is no, and it almost always is no, then the argument is structurally incomplete. It is not wrong because it feels bad. It is wrong because it is missing a variable, the most important variable in the universe. The third movement is the march. You take the thought, hands bound, moving in one direction, and you walk it to the feet of Christ. This is what prayer actually is, at its most functional level. Not a recitation, not a performance, a transfer of custody. You are handing over a prisoner you were never equipped to guard. You are saying, I identified this argument. I found the place where it excluded you, and I am bringing it here because I do not have the demolition equipment for this, and you do. And then, this is the part that requires the most faith. You walk away from the prisoner. You do not keep checking on it. You do not retrieve it at 2 in the morning to inspect it again. You transferred custody. It is no longer your prisoner to manage. If you have tried this and it has not worked, I want to ask you something gently. Did you do the first movement? Did you actually name the argument? Or did you just feel the anxiety and pray for the feeling to go away? Because God is not primarily in the business of removing uncomfortable feelings. He is in the business of demolishing arguments that have set themselves up against the knowledge of Him. But you have to bring Him the argument. You have to do the identification work first. The woman with the issue of blood identified her argument. She named it to herself repeatedly as she pushed through the crowd. She knew exactly what she was bringing to Jesus. 12 years of a conclusion. The world had written about her life, and a counter-argument she was building one step at a time. Peter identified his argument too late. By the time he recognized the logismos, wind, waves, death, it had already achieved hypsoma status. It had already built itself high enough to block his view of the person standing 3 feet away who had told him to come. The gap between the woman and Peter is not faith versus fear. Both of them were afraid. The gap in the direction they built their reasoning. She built toward Jesus. He built away from him. And before you judge Peter, understand something. What he did that night was still extraordinary. He got out of the boat. He walked on water. He called out to Jesus the moment he started sinking, and Jesus caught him immediately. The lesson of Peter on the water is not that he failed. The lesson is that a logismos formed in one direction can undo what faith built in another, and that even when it does, the reach of Christ is longer than the depth of the water. You are going to build logismos. Your brain is going to construct arguments against your own peace. That is not a character flaw. That is a human brain doing what human brains do. The question is not whether the arguments come. The question is what you do with them in the moment they arrive. Take them captive, name them, interrogate them, march them to Christ. But I want to show you one more thing, because there is a man in the Old Testament who did not know this method, who had no letter from Paul, no Greek vocabulary, no triumphal procession metaphor. And what happened to him and what God did in response may be the most important piece of this entire conversation. If you have been carrying anxiety for a long time, if the spiral is not new for you, if you have tried the breathing exercises and the journaling and the positive thinking and the prayer and woken up the next morning to find the same argument waiting for you in the dark, this next story is specifically for you. Stay with me just a little longer. 1 Kings, chapter 19. Read it slowly sometime when you have a quiet hour. Read it the way you would read a letter from someone you love who is not doing well. Elijah has just come off the greatest moment of his prophetic career. Mount Carmel, you may know the story. He stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal on a mountaintop in front of all of Israel and called down fire from heaven. The fire came. The prophets of Baal were exposed as frauds. The people fell on their faces and cried out, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And then the rains came, ending a 3-year drought Elijah himself had declared. It was the most dramatic single-day vindication in the entire Old Testament. And then a messenger arrived. Jezebel, the queen, sent Elijah a single sentence, one message. It said, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I did not make your life like the life of one of the prophets you killed." That is all it took. Not an army, not a battle. One sentence from one woman. And Elijah, the man who had just called fire from heaven, the man who had stood alone against 450 opponents and won, the man through whom God had just ended a 3-year drought, ran. The text says he was afraid. The Hebrew word is yirah, the same word used throughout the Old Testament for the fear of God himself. Elijah pointed that word, that awe, that overwhelming reverence, at Jezebel's threat instead of at the God who had just answered by fire. He ran a day's journey into the wilderness, and then he sat down under a broom tree, a low desert shrub, sparse shade, the kind of place you go when you have nowhere else to go, and he asked God to let him die. "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Read that sentence again. I am no better than my ancestors. That is not a random statement. That is a logismos, a structured argument Elijah has built about his own identity. I thought I was different. I thought what happened on Carmel meant something. I thought I was the one who would finally turn this nation back to God. But I am running from a woman's threat, the morning after calling down fire from heaven. I am no different. I am nothing. I have had enough. The hypsoma Elijah built was not pride. It was despair. Despair builds towers too. They just face inward instead of outward. And from the top of a despair tower, everything looks the same, flat gray. Your past victories irrelevant. Your future closed. Your identity collapsed down to the worst version of yourself in the worst moment. Elijah lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Pay attention to what happens next, because this is where most of us expect God to speak. We expect the correction, the rebuke, the gentle reminder of all the ways Elijah should know better. He just saw fire fall from heaven. He just watched 450 false prophets be proven wrong. He has more evidence for God's power than almost anyone alive. If there was ever a man who had no excuse for a logismos built against the knowledge of God, it was Elijah, right now, under this tree. And God sent an angel. The angel did not preach a sermon. The angel touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat." There was bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. That is it. No theology, no correction, No reminder of Mount Carmel, just bread, just water, just a touch on the shoulder. Elijah ate and drank and lay down again. The angel came a second time, touched him again, and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. The journey is too much for you. Not you are weak, not you have failed, not you should be stronger than this. The journey is too much for you." 5 words that contain more compassion than most people receive in a lifetime of therapy. God looked at his burned out, terrified, suicidal prophet under a desert shrub and did not lead with doctrine. He led with food and rest and the acknowledgement that what Elijah was carrying was genuinely heavy. This is not a small thing. This is God modeling the very thing Paul will later put into words. Before you can take a thought captive, sometimes your body needs bread. Sometimes the first act of spiritual warfare is sleep. Sometimes the logismos has grown so large, the hypsoma so tall, that God does not start with demolition. He starts with a touch on the shoulder and a meal on hot coals and the words, "The journey is too much for you. Rest." Elijah got up. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God, the same mountain where Moses had met God in the burning bush, where the law had been given, where the foundation of everything Elijah believed had been laid. He went to the source. He went to the place where his logismos could be confronted, not by argument, but by presence. He found a cave and spent the night, and God said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah answered, and this is important because God asked him to name it, to identify it, to say the argument out loud. Elijah said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." That is the logismos in full. Structured, argued, emotionally coherent, and factually wrong on its most critical point. He was not the only one left. God would tell him moments later that 7,000 in Israel had not bowed the knee to Baal. 7,000. The argument Elijah had built, "I am alone, I am the last one, there is nothing left," was constructed without a variable. The most important variable, the 7,000 he could not see from inside his cave. God said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in my presence." And then came the wind, so powerful it tore mountains apart and shattered rocks. But God was not in the wind. And after the wind came an earthquake. But God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came fire. But God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. The Hebrew phrase is kol damama daka. Kol damama, sound of fine silence, a thin whisper, a gentle stillness. The God who had answered Elijah with thunder and fire on Mount Carmel answered Elijah's breakdown with a whisper so quiet he had to wrap his face in, his cloak, to hear it. Here is what I want you to understand. This is not a story about a prophet who failed. This is not a cautionary tale about what happens when you let anxiety win. This is a story about what God does when the logismos has become a fortress so strong that the person inside cannot demolish it themselves. When the anxiety has been running long enough that the argument feels more real than 30 years of evidence to the contrary. When you are under the broom tree and you have had enough, God does not abandon you inside the fortress. He comes in after you. He brings bread. He lets you sleep. He walks 40 days beside you to the mountain. He stands outside your cave and asks you to name it, to say the argument out loud, to identify it, to bring it into the open. And then he does not answer the argument with a louder argument. He answers it with a whisper, because the logismos was built in noise, in threat, in the loud voice of Jezebel's single sentence echoing inside a mind that had nothing left to fight with. And God will not dismantle what noise built by adding more noise. He dismantles it with a stillness so precise, so deliberate, so impossibly gentle that you have to go quiet to hear it. And when you hear it, when you actually stop and go to the mountain and wrap your face in your cloak because you know something holy is happening, The first thing the voice says is not a doctrine. It is a question. What are you doing here? Not as a rebuke, as an invitation. Tell me where you are. Name the argument. Bring me the prisoner. You have been standing in two places long enough. Come to one place. Come here. And Elijah came out of the cave. So here is where we land. You came into this video with a spiral, maybe a mild one. The background hum of worry that has been running so long you have stopped noticing it. Maybe a severe one, the kind that wakes you at 3 in the morning and does not let go until the sun comes up and even then does not fully release. Maybe you came in skeptical because you have heard the take every thought captive verse before and it has never quite worked the way the coffee mug promised. Here is what I want to leave you with. 3 things. And the third one is the one that matters most. The first thing is this. Anxiety is not a faith failure. It is a logismos problem. Your brain is not broken. Your faith is not too small. You have been building structured arguments. Some of them reasonable, some of them completely understandable given what you have been through. And those arguments have constructed fortifications. Your willpower was never designed to demolish alone. Elijah called down fire from heaven and still ended up under a broom tree. The woman with the issue of blood pushed through a crowd while bleeding for 12 years before she reached the hem of his garment. Peter walked on water and still sank. The company you are keeping in your anxiety is better than you think. The second thing is this. The method is real, and it is specific, and it works in that specific order. Identify the argument, not the feeling. The argument behind the feeling. Interrogate it for the missing variable. March it to Christ at spear point. Transfer custody. Walk away from the prisoner. And if you have tried this and found yourself retrieving the prisoner at 2 in the morning to inspect it again, that is not failure. That is the beginning of the practice. Elijah did not get it right on the first night under the broom tree either. He needed bread and rest and a 40-day walk and a cave and a whisper before he was ready to come out and stand on the mountain. Give yourself the same mercy God gave him. The third thing, and this is the one I need you to hold on to, is that the method in 2 Corinthians 10:5 is not primarily a technique for mental health. It is a description of a relationship. Paul does not say take every thought captive to a principle. He does not say take every thought captive to a practice. He does not say take every thought captive to a positive affirmation or a breathing pattern or a gratitude journal. He says take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. To Christ, a person, not a system. The reason the method works is not because of the 3 steps. The reason the method works is because of who is waiting at the end of the march. The same person who reached out his hand to Peter in the exact moment he started sinking. The same person who stopped in a crowd of hundreds because one bleeding woman touched the hem of his garment and he felt it. The same person who sent an angel with bread and hot coals to a suicidal prophet under a desert shrub and said, "Not you have failed, not you should know better, but the journey is too much for you. Rest." That is who is waiting at the end of the march. So tonight, if the spiral comes, and it may come, do not fight it. Do not run from it. Do not try to out-argue it with the same mind that built it. Name it. Find the place where it excluded God, and march it at spear point to the feet of the one who has been reaching out his hand this entire time. The fortress will fall, not because you are strong enough to demolish it, because you were never meant to demolish it alone. That is why Paul says the weapons are not yours. They are dynatos to theo, mighty in God's sight. You are not the general in this procession. You are the soldier who identified the prisoner and brought it in. The demolition belongs to someone else, and he is very good at it. If this landed for you today, share it with one person who needs it. Not because the algorithm needs it, because someone in your life is under a broom tree right now, and they do not know that the angel is already on the way. And if you want to go deeper into this kind of word level, verse level Bible study, subscribe and stay close, because this is what we do here every single week, without exception. The still small voice is still speaking. Go quiet enough to hear it.